Serafina in the Black Cloak, Chapter 28. The woman did not answer the question. She rubbed her eyes and face with the backs of her hands. Then she looked around, glassy-eyed, taking in the forest and the angel's glade as if she did not understand what she was seeing or how she came to be there. The woman stumbled toward the opening of the lion's den beneath the roots of the willow tree. "Where are my babies?" she asked frantically. Seemingly ignorant of the severe danger of entering a lion's den, the woman went to the mouth of the den and looked in. She appeared to think her babies were in there, and Serafina felt so sorry for her. The poor creature must have lost her mind in the imprisonment of the cloak. Worried that the lioness would attack the woman, Serafina reached to pull her out of harm's way, but then the woman made a series of sharp, guttural hissing noises, and the lion cubs came trundling out of the den in response to her call. Laughing, the woman dropped down onto her knees and encircled the cubs in her arms as they rubbed their shoulders against her, purring. Serafina cringed, expecting the mountain lion to come charging out of the den at any second. But when she checked the den, there was no sign of the mother lion. Serafina scanned the trees nervously. The woman, still on her knees with the cubs, lifted her hands and looked at her palms as if they were things of amazement, opening and closing her fingers repeatedly, and she smiled. She rubbed her arms and her head and brushed back her hair like a person who had woken up from a terrible nightmare and had to reassure herself that she was still in one piece. She stood and looked up at the night sky and took a long, deep breath. Then she turned rapidly around, holding Nolan's jacket to her body. She laughed. She tilted her head back and shouted up at the stars, "I'm free." Still smiling, the woman looked around at her surroundings with a new brightness in her eyes. She looked at the graveyard and the stone angel and the other victims. Then she looked at Serafina. The woman froze. She stopped smiling. She stopped moving. She just stared at Serafina. Serafina's heart began pounding in her chest, a slow, steady rhythm. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Suddenly, the woman lunged at her with a startling burst of speed. Serafina leapt back to defend herself, but the woman caught her with ease and held her by the shoulders, looking into her face. "You're her," the woman said in astonishment. "You're really her. I can't believe it. Look at you." I don't understand," Serafina stammered, trying to pull away. "What's your name, child?" the woman asked. "Tell me your name." "Serafina," she mumbled, staring wide-eyed at the woman. "Let me look at you," the woman said, turning her first one way, then another, as if to take her measure in every way. "Just look at you. You're so big. How wonderful you are. You're amazing." Serafina reeled with dizziness as a new wave of confusion swept through her. What in heaven's name was this woman doing? "Who are you?" Serafina asked again. The woman paused and looked at her with compassion. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I forgot that you don't know me. My name is Leandra." The name meant nothing to Serafina, but the woman's eyes, her voice, her face, everything about her mesmerized her. Serafina felt like sparks of a crackling fire were popping in her mind. "But who are you?" Serafina asked again, clenching her fist in frustration. "You know who I am," Leandra said, studying her. "No, I don't," Serafina shouted, stomping her foot. "I'm your mother, Serafina," the woman said softly, reaching out and touching Serafina's face for the first time. Serafina went quiet and still. She frowned in confusion. How could this be possible? She studied the woman's face, trying to make sense of its configuration, trying to understand if she should believe what she was seeing in front of her. Her mouth felt terribly dry. She licked her lips and then clenched them together, breathing through her nose. She tried to steady her breathing as she looked at the woman's hair, her hands, her sinewy body. But it was her eyes more than anything, her yellow eyes, that told her that it was true. This was her mother. Serafina felt her face flash with heat. Suddenly, the image of her mother blurred as the tears welled in her eyes and brimmed over. She released a sigh that turned into a sob, then heaving sobs that she couldn't control, and her mother reached for her and pulled her into her arms. "Oh, kitten, it's all right," her mother said, as her own sobs rolled against Serafina. When Serafina finally spoke, her voice was so weak with emotion that she could only manage one frail and breathless word. "How?" she asked. Chapter 29. The children and adults who had been freed from the cloak began to wander through the playground. Some of them spoke to each other, trying to understand where they were, what had happened to them, but their minds were beset by confusion. Many were too bewildered to speak at all. Nola and Clara, along with the other children, stayed nearby, for they recognized Serafina, and they huddled together. But many of the adults wandered off, trying to remember their lives, their families. One man stood staring at a gravestone. "That's me," he said in shock. "That's my name. My wife and children must have thought I died." Serafina understood now why some of the graves in the graveyard had no bodies, but she still didn't understand how the woman standing before her could be her mother. "What happened to you?" she asked. The stars glistened in her mother's mesmerizing eyes. "I am a catamount, Serafina," she said, her breathing filling the icy air as she spoke. "My soul has two halves." Serafina breathed slowly in and out, trying to comprehend what her mother was saying, but it made no sense. "Come," Leandra said gently, touching her arm. "Sit here with me for a moment." They sat on the ground beside the pedestal of the stone angel, facing each other. "I once lived in a village near here. I was a normal human woman, but I could also change shape into a mountain lion whenever I wished to." As Serafina listened to her mother's story, everything else fell away. The cold air, the gravestones, the other victims of the cloak, everything disappeared except the quiet, soothing tone of her mother's voice. "I was married to a man who I loved dearly, and we were going to start a family. I was pregnant. He, too, was a catamount, and we spent much of our time together out here in the forest running and hunting." As her mother spoke, she gently wiped away the snow that was falling into Serafina's hair. "But those were difficult times for all of us. The forest in this area was dying, twisted and withered by an evil force." Serafina looked over at the remnants of the black cloak and the scorch marks on the ground. "One day," Leandra continued, "I was walking down a path in human form, and I was attacked by an unimaginable darkness." "The man in the black cloak," Serafina whispered. "During the battle, he wrapped his cloak around me. I fought for my life, but he was far too strong. My husband heard me screaming and came running. He, too, began to fight, but we were losing. I saw the man in the black cloak strike your father down. In a matter of seconds, I was going to be overcome in the cloak's black folds. I was terrified. I feared for the lives of the babies inside me. I tried to change into a mountain lion to fight him with tooth and claw, but in that instant the cloak sucked in the human part of my soul. I kept fighting as fierce as any mother lion has ever fought, and I finally escaped and fled, but the cloak had torn me asunder." "I don't understand," Serafina cried. "What do you mean? What is asunder?" "The black cloak tore me apart, Serafina. It absorbed the human part of my soul, for that was its purpose. But it had never encountered a catamount before."